The review of this next book is called Medieval Technology and Social Change, so I expect it to get thousands of hits. Um, Medieval Technology and Social Change was written by a guy named Lynn, who is a historian of medieval science. And this was, as if the subject wasn't off the beaten path enough, I read this for fun, of course, and it wasn't that fun. It really could have been a really great book. It's about a fascinating subject, but this was just kind of a not very engaging, I guess. But I read it because you find it on, even though it's something like 40 years old, you still find it on a lot of syllabi having to do with medieval civilization, medieval history, especially medieval history of science. That's why I picked it up. Local university library, guys. So at the heart of some of the best works on medieval history rests this claim that the Middle Ages were not the dark, backward theocracies of popular lore, right? But these sort of dynamic societies full of art and culture and music and science. And with the advent of Lynn White's, he wrote it in 1962, whatever year I said earlier, that's wrong, 1962 book, Medieval Technology and Social Change, we can add technology to the list of subjects that have been sadly left off the list that are usually associated with the medieval age. White looks at the advent of what he considers to be three seminal technological innovations: the stirrup, like on a horse, the agricultural revolution of the early Middle Ages, and the rise of mechanical power in the late Middle Ages. He also claims that he has two other intentions: to, quote, show the kinds of sources and the means which must be used if the unlettered portions of the past, which involve far more than technological history, are to be explored, end quote, and to demonstrate, quote, long before Vasco da Gama, the cultures of the Eastern Hemisphere were far more osmotic than most of us have believed, end quote. Sorry, not end quote. He goes on. To understand the sources and ramifications of developments in medieval Europe, one must search Benin, Ethiopia, and Timor, Japan, and the Altai. That's where he ends his quote. At least according to the title, he also wants to outline the kinds of social impacts this had on the people who were dealing with the technologies in question. For a book of only about 134 pages, this is a really ambitious project that he set up for himself. I always try to rate and comment on a book for what it is and for what it claims to be instead of what I want it to be. But there is much more of a focus on the medieval technology here than there is the social change by quite a large margin. The first essay provides a seamless integration of many of the areas listed above, including how the stirrup was related to the rise of a professional cavalry in the Frankish military, and how in turn that was related to the development of feudalism. The second and third case studies, however, rather quickly veer into the minutiae of agriculture and mechanical design, respectively. The transition from two-field to three-field crop rotation, and a somewhat detailed account of the contents of Conrad Kaiser's Bella Fortis are details that I probably could have lived without, but got anyway. And even though Lynn White explicitly mentions that he wants to trace the historical origins of these innovations, many essay subsections feel overly listy and a little superficial, instead of honing in on the European focus that he seems to be most interested in here. A thorough history of these developments would have been very interesting for someone else, perhaps not as much for me, but it would have needed a much, much longer book. I didn't come to this because of interest, really, but because it was cross-referenced in another book I was reading at the time about the ideas of Ernest Gellner, who was an anthropologist and sociologist and philosopher in his own right. Specifically, I was reading about his Plow, Sword, and Book. His book called Plow, Sword, and Book. I thought I recognized White's name, and after looking on my bookshelf, I found that I owned this book that he was talking about and decided to read it. There are, I'm sure, people who will find this endlessly fascinating. Bless their souls. They're much more patient and easily amused than I am. And I'm pretty easily amused. You see the kinds of books that I talk about. It may even still be highly relevant in its field. I don't know enough to say so one way or the other, even though it does pop up on syllabi quite often. I now know about as much about medieval technology as I did before I read it, i.e., next to nothing, though that wasn't the book's fault. For what it's worth, you can still find this book, like I said, on a lot of graduate level course syllabi covering the Middle Ages, the history of science, and even politics. But unless you're interested in the real arcana of the technology in question, and especially tracking said technology from continent to continent, and from one medieval treatise to the next, I recommend perhaps a more popular book on the subject.